right. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for being so punctual this morning. I appreciate it for the early start. All right. Just a reminder, Ms. Hurt, you're still under oath, okay? All right. Next question.
Thank you, Your Honor. Amber, when did the first act of physical violence by Mr. Depp occur?
Objection asked and answered.
No, overruled. Go ahead.
It would have been early 2012.
And how did you determine this?
I reviewed my therapist's
Objection,
notes.
hearsay.
She hasn't even answered it, Your Honor.
All right, I'll allow the answer.
By reviewing my therapist's notes.
Objection,
All right,
hearsay.
I'll sustain the objection.
Your Honor, but it's not offered to prove the truth of the matter asserted. It's explaining what she looked at.
I'll sustain the objection.
Okay. When did you earlier believe the first act of physical violence occurred?
Well, I had always believed up until recently that it had started later, that the violence started around early 2013, not early 2012.
Now, you testified earlier that the first act of physical violence by Mr. Depp related to the Winona Wino tattoo. Do you recall that testimony?
I do.
Okay. Does that change your testimony, realizing that this is earlier? Was this, in fact, still the first act?
Objection, leading.
Sustained.
What was the first act?
Objection asked and answered.
Sustained.
How do you remember the first act of violence?
Well, you never forget it. That's how I remember it. It changes your life forever. You never forget the first time someone hits you like that. I just had the date wrong.
Okay. And how is it that you think you got the date wrong?
Objection calls for speculation.
Overruled.
I'm embarrassed to say I think I would have liked to have believed that the period of time in which I had to fall in love with Johnny, in which we fell in love and he was sober and he wasn't violent to me, lasted for a lot longer than it did. I think I would have liked to have believed that I wasn't hit so early in the relationship and still stayed. He was also sober for a period in 2012, which was a peaceful time for us, in which we fell in love. So I had kind of allowed myself, I guess, to forget that the beginning of that period, 2012, before he got sober, was really violent and chaotic as well. I'm embarrassed to say that.
Now, you testified that the police were called multiple times. Other than the May 21, 2016, what other occasions were there where the police were called?
They were called in December of 2011. They were called in 2012. They were called in 2013 in March by the landlord. I had sought advice from Laurel Anderson as to whether I should call the police following
Objection,
the December.
hearsay.
Sustained.
Okay. When you filed the domestic violence temporary restraining order, how many acts of abuse did you allege at that time?
I gave the last couple, I believe, last two incidents, maybe three.
And why didn't you tell of all the acts of abuse at that time?
I was following advice from my counsel.
Okay. How many instances of abuse were included in the UK trial?
There were 14 acts of physical abuse and violence and 3 acts of sexual abuse. Violence.
And why were those 17 included in the UK trial?
Well, I was not a party, a direct party. I was a witness, so it was whatever their counsel, the Sun Council, chose.
Okay. When is the first time you were called upon to provide a detailed accounting of as many times as you could recall of physical and sexual abuse by Mr. Depp?
Objection, hearsay.
That's not hearsay, Your Honor. I'm asking her when she was called upon to do so.
Well, the objection is hearsay.
Right, but it's not offered to prove the truth of the matter asserted, and it's just asking for date.
All right, overruled.
Thank you.
A few months ago. February in 2022, this year, was the first time I was asked to do so, other than cold in a deposition.
Okay. And when you were asked to provide those, what did you do to be able to prepare that accounting, that full accounting?
Well, I had the benefit of my therapist.
Objection, hearsay.
So, Your Honor, she's not saying what the therapist said. I'm just asking.
I'll overrule the objection.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I looked at my therapist notes. I had the benefit of those notes, which we had received in February, as well as I reviewed calendars, photos, text messages, my journals, my diaries, of which there were many. I put all of those together. It took a lot of time to be able to, adequately refresh my recollection and fill in the details over the course of the 5 years we were together.
And what did you do when you put that all together?
I kind of filled in and collected all of these various pieces of information and gave a fuller account as best I could for each incidents of violence that I had record of. I think it was called an interrogatory.
In this case?
In this case,
All right.
excuse
Did
me.
you sign that under oath?
I did.
Okay. And it was provided to counsel for Mr. Depp?
It was.
Okay. And was it a pretty lengthy document?
It was far too long.
And how is it that you didn't just remember all of those events like this?
That's not how your memory or my memory works. We were together for 5 years, almost 4.5, and it was a very violent, chaotic, at times very loving, emotional relationship. So as anyone can imagine, there was a lot going on, and unfortunately the violence became almost normal, especially towards the end. It was just, it's hard to say that now, but the violence was almost normal. And, your brain does with trauma what it does, puts it away best you can. So frankly, I was shocked to see a lot of the information presented to me through my therapist's notes, because she was taking them in real time.
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
All right, I'll sustain her objection.
Okay, we'll move past what the therapist said in her notes. Okay. Now, there's one more. You also provided a declaration in this case early on. Do you recall that, trying to move the case to California?
Yes, there was a declaration in 2019.
All right. And did you describe some of the events of violence in that declaration?
Objection, leading.
What, if anything, was said about violent acts in that declaration?
I was taking the advice of my counsel. It was to get it moved, I believe.
Okay. And was there, did you include all of them?
No.
Objection, leading.
Overruled.
Thank you.
No, I did not include all of the incidents of violence. That was not the point of making this declaration. We were making this declaration in an effort to move it to California, because as hard as it is to go through this sort of trial as it is, it's even harder to do so in a place that neither Johnny nor I are connected to.
Okay. Now, you testified earlier about guitars, and you said you've never played a guitar. Have you ever played a guitar player in a movie?
You could say I posed with a guitar. It turns out I am an unteachable.
Okay. I'm going to take you to the tape recordings. Why did you and Mr. Depp start taping each other?
Well, at first it was meant to be a way to get to the heart of some of our communication issues, in order to discover in a therapeutic fashion kind of what was some of our issues in our communication.
Okay. Now, we heard an audio tape earlier during this trial in which you said the word couch repeatedly. Can you please explain to the jury what that meant?
couch was a word that we had been given, that we decided upon, rather.
Objection, hearsay.
Just tell us what Mr. Depp said about this.
That it was a safe word. It was meant to be a safe word, like a word, like truce, where you put down the proverbial guns and you say, truce, we're not fighting anymore. Couch was supposed to be a word that you used, or that we used as a truce. I don't want to fight anymore. You win. Let's stop this. That was the mention of couch, which you heard earlier in a recording.
Now, what, if any, discussions did you have with Mr. Depp about threatening to divorce each other or threatening to leave?
Objection calls for hearsay to the
I'm
extent
asking
it
for-
calls for Ms. Heard's statements.
I'm asking for discussions with Mr. Depp.
It's still her.
Just tell us what Mr. Depp said, don't tell us what you said.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. So what did Mr. Depp say in your discussions about the use of the term threatening to divorce or threatening to leave each other?
Objection, leading.
Overrule.
Well, Johnny would always say the only way out of this was death. But in fights, in particularly heated ones, we had found, we were using divorce in the fight, in some of our heated fights. We tried not to, but that kind of deteriorated after the December incident that I got beat up pretty badly, and after that point, it was used a lot more often.
Okay. Now, March 26, 2015, this is after the first Australia trip and after the staircase incident. I'm going to ask, Michelle, can you bring up Depp Exhibit 371A? This is a tape recording, and it's going to be at 1 minute, 1:01 to 2:29.
Could you say that times again?
Yes, it's 1:01 to 2:29. And if we could, I don't know whether you had turned up that volume. I know it's hard to hear these.
Is this in evidence already?
I'm moving it into evidence, Your Honor, but these are the tape recordings between the two, which I think we had agreed.
Is there any objection to 371A?
Your Honor, if you just give me a moment to confirm there's no other voices.
Plaintiffs. Yes, that's it. It's not in evidence.
It's not in evidence, Your Honor, so could you please confirm that there are no other voices?
I will confirm that.
Okay, all right.
And it's Depp's exhibit.
Right.
It's Mr. Depp's exhibit.
Plaintiffs 371A then, any objection?
No objection.
Okay, 371A in evidence. Thank you.
And we may need to, Sammy, if you listen, and we may need to turn that volume up. Sometimes your control is a little bit better than what we have, Max.
I see somebody who's changing always into different versions of a person that I recognize for a brief moment, and then he slips away, and he disappears. And then I get a different version of him. I get the insecure, scared version of him that lashes out in a different medium every time. So if it's Adderall Junkie Johnny, then he's abusive, and he's a bully, and he's a tyrant, and he's mean, he's reactionary, and he's incendiary, and anything I do and say is cause for violence or anger. If I speak to him honestly, bluntly, from the heart, I'm yelling at him. If I argue back with him, then I'm abusive. If I don't say anything, then I am dismissive or absent or what's wrong or somewhere else. If I engage with him, I'm part of the problem. I'm yelling, I'm mean. If I don't engage with him, then I'm mean. I'm part of the problem. No matter what I do, I'm fucked. Because if I look at him the wrong way, he's a problem. If I say the wrong thing, God knows what it is. I'm the problem. I'm the problem. Either way. That's the guy who's on a bunch of fucking speed.
What did you mean when you were saying that to Mr. Depp?
That no matter my perception was that no matter what I did, no matter what I did to de-escalate, walk away from him, to confront him, to try to, nothing I did made a difference. Nothing I did changed his rage at me. Nothing I did changed the violence towards me. Nothing I did calmed him down. And I was constantly doing a juggling act of what kind of version of Johnny I was dealing with. There were different versions of him, and they were drastically different from one another, and even more so than them being different from one another, they didn't even sometimes remember what the other version did or said. They acted almost like independent versions of this person, depending on what combination of drugs and alcohol he was on. That's what I was trying to express to him. It's just the futility of me responding and successfully, and the futility of trying to constantly negotiate with him and the substances he was on at the time.
I'm going to take you to April 15, 2015, the premiere of When I Live My Life Over Again. What, if anything, did you do for that premiere?
I believe that premiere was in New York City. It was a small independent film I shot. I went back to New York to attend the premiere.
Michelle, can you bring up Defendant's Exhibit 421, please? Does this accurately depict the scene portrayed in this picture?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'm going to move the admission of Defendant's Exhibit 421.
Any objection?
No objection.
All right, 421 in evidence.
May we publish to the
Publish
jury?
to the jury.
Thank you. Amber, could you please describe for the jury what this picture is?
That is a picture of me a few months, I believe this is April of 2015, so it's a few months after the March incident that happened in Australia, early March, in which Johnny held me down on the countertops and my arms were cut on the glass
And
in that attack.
And if we could draw attention to your arm there, are those scars? What are those? Please describe for the jury what those are.
Those are scars that I obtained while Johnny was strangling me and assaulting me on the countertop in Australia.
Okay. Michelle, can you bring up Defendant's Exhibit 423, please? And does this accurately portray the scene shown?
Yes, that's...
Hold on a second. I'm going to move the admission of Defendant's 423, please.
No objection.
423 in evidence.
Thank you. May we publish? All right, and please describe to the jury what this shows.
It is a picture of me on a red carpet. You can see my scars. Even though I have makeup on them, they're a bit harder to cover because they're rather fresh.
Okay. Now, after this, in April of 2015, you returned to Australia with Mr. Depp, did you not?
Objection leading.
Overruled, I'll allow it.
Thank you.
Yes, we did.
Okay, and tell the jury about that trip.
Well, after Johnny was able to get clean off of the coke and the other drugs enough to get the hand surgery he needed, there commenced a period of time of sobriety for Johnny. His doctor had fired him and then came on when Johnny agreed to get clean.
Objection, hearsay, non-responsive.
Don't say what, I mean, we've already had, Your Honor, we've already had the testimony from Dr. Kipper, but don't say what Dr. Kipper did, just tell the other part, just don't say what somebody else said. Okay?
So there was this period of sobriety after that, and Johnny was very committed to being clean and sober, and I thought we had finally done it. We finally did it. We were through it, and we were never going back, meaning he was going to be clean and sober for good this time, and we had a wonderful period of, we fell back in love, or deeper in love than we were before. It seemed things were so good. We were talking about a future again. We were talking about having kids. I mean, when Johnny wasn't using it, was so peaceful. We had we had a good time together. We went back to Australia like that, in that state, and had a few months. We even had my parents come and visit us in Australia, and we were talking about babies and about buying a farm and, looking for homes in California. And we were in a really beautiful, peaceful period. It was wonderful. It was wonderful.
Now, how did you stay at the same place that you did the earlier time in Australia?
We went back to a very remodeled version of that home. I mean, remodeled, very cleaned up version of that home. Same walls, same structure, but looked a bit different, as you can imagine.
How did you feel going back to that home, given what had happened in March, early March?
The home isn't the problem. If you're living in domestic violence, you don't just not go home. You don't just not go into the kitchen just because you were slapped in that kitchen. People living in domestic violence live in their homes. That's almost, the home isn't the problem. That's the normal part of your home. And for me, Johnny was my home. Where we were a couple was my home. And that home was often really violent. But it wasn't the structure itself. It was Johnny. And when we went back to Australia, that home, Johnny, was in a completely different, he had done a complete 180. Clean, sober, present, calm. We were peaceful. I mean, any of the gripes and the problems that he seemed to have about me went away when he was sober. And so we managed to go back to that same house, but in a very different way. It felt very different.
June 16, 2015, the Magic Mike Tour. Where did you go for that tour?
While I was in Australia, I got the call for that press tour and went to Europe for the press tour for that movie. And, I was nervous because problems arise when I'm having to work when I leave.
Objection, non-responsive.
That was still responsive.
Well, sustain the objection. Next question.
Michelle, can you please bring up Defendant's Exhibit 447? I'm going to ask you first, does this accurately portray the scene depicted?
Yes.
Your Honor, remove the admission of Defendant's Exhibit 447.
No objection.
447 in evidence. You can publish.
Thank you. And Michelle, if you could zoom in just a little bit closer. Amber, could you tell the jury about this picture?
Yes, that's me on the red carpet promoting the Magic Mike movie I was in. You can see the scars on my body, on my arms.
Okay.
You can't see everything, of course, but...
Okay. And Michelle, can you bring up Defendant's Exhibit 449? And Amber, does this accurately depict the scene portrayed?
Yes, it does.
Your Honor, remove the admission of Defendant's 449.
No objection.
All right, 449 in evidence.
Okay.
Publish.
And Amber, could you please describe to the jury what this portrays?
This is, you can see the scars on my arm from that attack. Also around this time, Johnny was calling me on the phone before and after, while I was doing these press events, and sometimes I would be on the phone with him, kind of managing accusations about why I didn't pick up sooner, didn't text back sooner, and sometimes I actually on this tour many times had to delay getting out of the car or...
Objection, non-responsive.
I'll ask that. How did Mr. Depp react to your going on this press tour?
He was very upset with me, and I just remember crying on the phone with him a lot and having to hang up to do press events.
All right. Thank you.